Top Gun had been around, aggressors, red flag, all those things are in place right now. But what they didn't have is they didn't have the real thing. And the Air Force had a handful, and when I say handful, 3 airplanes. They had a MiG-21, 2 MiG-17s early on, have donut, have drill programs, things like that. But they were really on the test side of the Air Force Systems Command back in the day. And they did some exploitation, but it never really translated over to TAC or the Navy. So in the halls of the Pentagon in the mid-late 70s, people had been talking for years, hey, they knew they had a handful of MiGs. Wouldn't it be cool if we get a real squadron?
Tower to my stations, release you, runway 4 left, wind 040 at 5, clear for takeoff.
Seat tied, altimeter 0 eyes, we're clear for takeoff, clear for the airspace. Viper check 2.
My brand ramp curve was at 354. So yeah, that's on. Next picture 16, 15,000,
Viper 1 target.
Z-Man, it's good to see you again. It's been a minute.
It's been a little bit, Rain, but thanks for staying in contact, and glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So today I'm excited. We're going to dig into a little bit of the book that you finally published. Last time we did this, you were in the midst of writing it, and I was fortunate because you kind of sent me different chapters as you were going along, which I really appreciated. And not to make you feel good about yourself or whatever, but I will say not only is the Red Eagles a very fascinating topic, and I think most people who aren't familiar with that, we'll dive into that in a minute. But when I was reading the chapters, you do a very good job, at least for me. It's like I can feel like I'm sitting in the cockpit sometimes when you're describing the rejoins and things like that. So I really enjoyed that. It made me feel like I was there, and I think that's the best compliment I can give when it comes to reading a book. Is man, I felt like I was there in the cockpit with you, which was pretty cool.
Well, thanks. Then I met my objective of trying to bring the reader into the cockpit with me and a little bit inside my cranium as far as what the thought process was going along. So, man, maybe I hit a sweet spot. I hope so.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going well so far because it's been out for just a little bit. I'm actually going to start with the back of this. And this is from General Carlisle, which to me, I always like to see just our overlapping connectivity and how short, I guess, what the telephone game, or I guess what is it, the 7 layers of Kevin Bacon, how you're connected. But General Carlisle, he actually certified me as the demo pilot. It was one of his last few months as the air combat commander. And then funny enough, his roommate at the Air Force Academy ended up being one of my biggest mentors to put me on the path to go into the Air Force to begin with. So it's just kind of funny how it's all connected. But you and him were squadron mates, and he wrote this about the book, saying that life in the Red Eagles was unique. Imagine a group of young captains, a few majors, and lieutenant commanders, and a couple lieutenant colonels living and working in secrecy, flying airplanes that no one admitted we had. The stories practically write themselves. Rob Z-Man Zettel has brilliantly captured the spirit, challenges, and camaraderie in the life of our secret MiG squadron, which I do think summarizes it pretty well, and then also just kind of showcases how small of a world it really is.
Yeah, small world indeed. Yeah. Hawk was a great guy, great squadron mate, and of course, great commander and stuff. So, yeah, good guy.
Yeah, and he actually jumped out of one, right?
He did. We can probably get to that later on. That happened after my watch. So, anyway. I always rib them a little bit, saying, hey, at least my landings equal my takeoffs,
That's fair. Fair enough, But, man. Well, for those who didn't catch the first episode, that's out there, and that really kind of covers the beginning of your career. We walk through your career. We touch on the Red Eagles. Today, I really would like to dig into that aspect a little bit more. But I think with that kind of kicking off, you had a unique opportunity because you flew F-4s, F-5s, you jumped into the Red Eagle Squadron. I'd be curious, just overall, your perception, the differences between American fighters, Soviet fighters. What was it like going from F-4s, F-5s into the Red Eagles? And I know that's kind of a big ask, but can we dive into that just a little bit?
Sure. It was, excuse me if I keep saying or use the word unique throughout this session here, but Yeah, you come from Western fighters. We all went through T-38s. I was in the F4, and then onto a few different squadrons in the Phantom over in Kadena and in Osan, and then aggressors at Clark Air Base, so flying the F-5E, and then being selected for the Red Eagles. I suppose, whenever anyone is selected for something and you've never been there, you conjure up in your mind what it will be like when you first arrive. And I did the same thing, naturally. So I'm kind of conjuring up in my mind what it's going to be like when I step foot on Tonopah Test Range day one. And just let me say, I wasn't even close. It was far different than what I expected. But to get to your question, what is it like stepping into the MiG? That first day, the commander, shows me around and shows these hangars, and doors are opening, and here are 2 rows of MiG-21s. We go to the next hangar. There's 2 rows of MiG-23s, and up to this point, I've never seen a MiG in my life. This is fall of 1983, and so the closest you get, were these black and white grainy photos in an intel briefing or whatever it is. But here before me are all these MiG. So, needless to say, I'm kind of blown away. And then the very next thing that blows me away is I get introduced to the operations officer, a guy by the name of, awesome guy, Monroe Watley, F4 guy, F4 fighter weapons school instructor and stuff, but just a fighter pilot. Yeah. And he says, okay, 1 week from today, maintenance and weather allowing, you're going to jump in that MiG, you're going to take off. So it was 1 week. And so we didn't have any simulators. There were no 2C trainers. So, they hire you for your experience. Luckily, I got hired. And you just hit the books, and you get paired up with your IP one-on-one with a guy by the name of Captain Mike Mock Roy, call sign Mock. Great guy. I actually had known him, cross paths a little bit with him at Kadena. He had been in one of the other F4 squadrons. He was in the 44th. I was in the 12th. And anyway, we went different directions. I went up to Osan. He went to the Eagle at Kadena, and then later on back to Nellis as an aggressor. And then boom, I show up, and here he is in the Red Eagle. So, but he's my paired IP. So it's kind of like you're having a tutor. So for the next 4 or 5 days, I'm just in the books. He's giving me academics, kind of like, the slide tray kind of thing back in the day. Some of you probably don't remember that. But we go through academics and go through all the normal stuff, but it's not like a normal RTU because we don't have all those assets. And so it was one-on-one tutoring. So you go through this and what we use we literally did hangar flying. We went out there's a VIP hangar right off the squadron lounge there in operations, and I would go and sit there in the static display, MiG-21, and just start flipping switches the ones I could. Didn't raise gear, of course. But you went through all this stuff. You got a flight manual on one leg, and you got your checklist in your other hand. So you go through this, and little by little, you get to the point where, okay, let's go out and crank one up. So the day before you're going to solo, which every flight was, you go out and you first crank up the airplane, and then you learn to taxi it around, because taxiing it was totally different than the Western fighters. In fact, this isn't too far off the mark. The hardest thing about flying the MiG-21 was getting it to and from the runway, because we didn't have hydraulic nose wheel steering like we have on any other Western fighter. It had pneumatic brakes. So you had to, if you can conjure up this, you had to meter air pressure to one brake or another with a castering nose wheel to turn in whatever direction. And you didn't want it, you had to be pretty judicious on how you use that, because you had a limited supply stored in an air bottle. And if you ran out, you had to be towed back. So
there's no compressor that, like, once you get the engines fired up, it's like
not
charging.
On this model. Later on, the Soviets were wise enough. They go, why don't we put a compressor on there so we don't run into this? But no, the models we had, even later on, the Chinese F7s, they didn't have it. So you had, I don't even remember what how many, it wasn't pounds, kilograms of compressed air we had in it, but let's say it was 180. And so anyway, getting out of the story, you would taxi out. You'd start up the airplane, go through your flows, get it to the end of the runway, and then, okay, taxi on back. And you taxi back, okay, that was the morning. And in the afternoon, you get ready to do the same thing, only this time you're going to take it out on the runway for what we call high-speed run. So everything's the same. You start up now. This is the second time you've taxied the airplane. You go down, and you go through your, end of the runway checks, canopy's down, brakes are set, everything else ready, flaps, you name it. And you get clearance from tower onto the runway to do a high-speed run. You get into position, and they say, okay, you're cleared, and you just, release the brakes, put it in full afterburner, let it kick in the ass, and down you go up to about 100 knots, maybe 80. And then you pull out of afterburner, you hit the drag chute, make sure that thing pops up, feel that, and then you taxi off again, hoping you still have some air left. You drop the drag chute on the infield and then try to make it all the way back. So luckily, knock on wood, I was able to make it back and forth each time throughout my little over 2 years flying the MiG-21. But it was squirrely. But sorry about this, but getting back to your question about what was it like jumping into that fighter. Human engineering wasn't really a concept in the Soviet Union. There was stuff scattered all over the place. I mean, You looked straight through the combining glass. It wasn't a heads-up display, but just gun sight, combining glass, reticle, you name it, and you got a big giant gun camera off to the right side, and other things to the left. So visibility wasn't great right up here at your 11 to 1 o'clock. But the one thing on the Soviet model, it was a one-piece canopy, kind of like you had on F-16. Not near as nice. But it would come down, and because of that, you didn't have a canopy bow. So, you just move the airplane a little bit, and you could see really well, even though it was a small cockpit. But, and I kind of use this analogy with people when they ask, which is a legitimate question, what was it like getting into it and flying it? And I kind of use the analogy, it's kind of like going from your car that you've been driving for years and years and years, and now you go someplace and you get an exotic rental car. And at first you're kind of thrown back and you go, oh, okay, I need to get it squared away. Where is everything? Most of the big things are here, but how do I hook up my iPhone and GPS navigation? Okay, once you get that down, you go, okay, I kind of got this. Well, same thing in MiG-21. Once you took off, and if I would have closed my eyes, of course, no one with any brains would do that, but if you would, you'd go, it feels like an F5. Because it really did. It actually may have been a little lighter, and we're really splitting hairs now, than the F5. I mean, the ailerons were incredibly light to the touch. So in that regard, physically flying the airplane was great because we're pretty much we're just day VFR flyers. We didn't do any instrument work. We didn't fly at night. So pretty nice. You go out there and fly nothing but daytime, and it's like out at Nellis and stuff like that, high desert. 80-90% of the time you've got VFR, VMC weather. So pretty good in that regard, and you're just heads out flying your, fast Soviet fighter. And again, once you become accustomed, our checkout was you had five hops in the airplane and then a check ride. So 6 hop is a check ride. You do your SFOs and all the other stuff and hard turns, loops, whatever you do. And you come back, do a number of patterns, and you touch down just almost exactly like the F5. The airspeeds were within about 10 knots or so. So, sight picture is just a little bit different, but still had that nice flare. If you can think back to T-38, I've been in the backseat of a Viper a couple of times, so I can't remember quite what that was like. But, yeah, you flare the airplane, touchdown, piece of cake. That was what it was like.
Obviously, I can't draw. Maybe a parallel I could draw is like I can envision going from plane to plane, right? Like once you get airborne, you kind of at this point you can figure out the handling characteristics. It seems like that's just kind of a natural thing for most, right? Find where the bounds are. But for me, I think the ground ops, which you've alluded to already a little bit, I imagine there's got to be a story or two because I'm just thinking. Even going to like the 777. I mean, I sat in front of a paper trainer and then I sat in the sim, pressing all the buttons and all the switches. You've already said too, like the ergonomics, the human engineering factor of like putting things in a logical order wasn't on the top priority list of the Soviets at the time. But I would imagine, just from probably having Cyrillic in the cockpit, seeing all these things, like just there had to be a lot to digest in order to get the flows right, to get the motor started, making sure you didn't inadvertently, shut the engine down, things like that. Like, you didn't have a paper poster you could take home and study. I mean, it was all there. So was there any like shenanigans? Was there anything that you remember like in those first couple sorties, or probably the sorties overall, where like, man, I'm learning this on the fly, or this popped up and I didn't think about it?
Luckily, for me, no. Just thank God for good luck, But there were a few guys that taxied the airplane down the end runway, and they go, I don't have enough air pressure to get back. So, maintenance guys would go out there with a big tow bar, and of course, you're probably going to get a call sign out of that, But there was one, and it didn't happen to me, thank God. And as I was talking to you about taking off and what the ailerons feel like, there was one guy, I won't mention his name due to embarrassment, but he took off and he gets airborne. And I don't know if you knew a guy named Ted Drake, Gabby Drake. He was our assistant ops officer there, and then highest time guy in the Red Eagles in the MiG-23. Was F-16 guy. Okay. Great guy. In fact, I think he's one of our first F-16 guys we hired. But he was in the SOF he was in the tower that day as SOF, and this particular pilot was taking off his MiG-21. He gets airborne, he calls us off, he goes, hey, I've got a flight control problem, I really can't handle the airplane very well. And Ted Drake just simply says, you see that button to the right, about three knobs back, turn that up. So he goes, okay, no problem, see ya. So what it was a boost pump for the aileron boost. And if you didn't have it on, it was like driving a Mack truck without any power steering. Well, anyway, so that's sort of some of the shenanigans, but that's about the worst in the MiG-21 because it's like the easiest airplane to fly. I mean, it really was pretty easy. And I think, going from Western fighters to that, and then, of course, we came there with a lot of experience, but I kind of, throughout the time, I would think back, okay, what would it had been like to be a North Vietnamese pilot flying a MiG-21, not having all the experience we had, and then jumping into their MiGs and then going on and taking on this armada of F-105s, F-4s, you name it. And, of course, they're shooting real stuff at you. But the beauty of it is the airplane was that easy that somebody could get out of a MiG-17 and jump into MiG-21, and within a few days, they'd be ready to go for it. Now, you had to, like any airplane, you learn the finer points of it, when to use the flaps, when not, how to accelerate, to zoom, you name it, with the stall characteristics. Well, I put the airplane, have no idea how hard they flew those airplanes, but we could take the the MiG-21, and once you're below corner velocity, you can just pull that stick straight back. You're not gonna over-G it. You're not gonna depart. You can run it straight up, out of energy, zero airspeed. You fall back down. You kick a rudder. You fall off to one side. You keep flying. Of course, you didn't touch the throttle. There's no need to. You just left it parked up in full afterburner. But it was that forgiving that it didn't take much time at all. And the beauty of the program, at least luckily for me, having come right from an aggressor at Clark Air Base in the Philippines, well, we did a lot of one. Well, we didn't do. Let me correct that. We didn't do a lot of one-on-one with F-15s, F-16s. We did 4v4s and that kind of thing. But occasionally, a buddy of mine, and if you read the book, you'll probably recognize it. But a guy by the name of Clark Peel, I'll give him a shout out. He kind of mentored me, and luckily we were in the same flight. And whenever we'd fight somebody, whether it's Eagles, Vipers, or whatever, and if they happened to bingo out first, which occasionally they would, he and I would stay out in the area and we just fight one-on-one. So I had all this experience of flying and fighting 1v1. So when I went to the MiG-21 and I'm showing F-16 weapons school students, F-16 line guys, F-15, whatever it would be, Tomcats, Hornets out of Miramar, we'd show them a visual setup and get slow. I was right in my element. And now I'm in a MiG-21, which is even better, slow speed. So I go, man, this is great. So I'm kind of like stepping up as far as capabilities in a slow speed knife fight. And the other thing, on the other extreme, the MiG-21 was also very, very fast. So But the bad point is, you know, you didn't have much fuel, so you couldn't do that very long. So it wasn't a surprise to me when I looked back and thought about the Vietnamese and how they flew their airplanes. Yeah, it was a lot of slash and burn. Boom, just go in there, see if you can get a shot off real quick on a Thud or a Phantom, and you're out of there because you didn't really have fuel to hang around much. So anyway, so that's what that was like. But it was a great flying airplane, and of course, you know, we'll probably get to the MiG-23 later on, which was 180 in the other direction. You know.
Yeah, I would like to definitely talk about that. Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the parallel, or you bring up the North Vietnamese. I never thought about that. I've talked about it. It's been a while, but if we look at like the Ukrainians with F-16s, you know, going from Soviet fighters predominantly in their arsenal to then getting the F-16. We got some apples and oranges we're comparing, but to a certain degree, I thought that was going to be one of the biggest outside of maintenance and logistics. And yeah, it's a very capable integrated air missile defense that they're having to deal with, a lot of overlapping missile engagement zones, et cetera. But to go from a MiG-29 and then get plopped into an F-16, quite different. Mm-hmm. So, someone's probably going to write a history book on it or write a book for history down the road on that one. But that'd be an interesting comparison because I never really thought about it. But again, you're both of those, the North Vietnamese and Ukrainians, you're more or less learning that real-time on-the-job training. We've sent some people back to the United States to learn to fly the F-16 or other countries, but kind of a short, more or less transition course and then plop them down and, you know, sink or swim almost, seems like.
Yeah, just think about it. When you checked out in the F-16, you go and you think, at least we did this in the Eagle. I don't even having, with all the experience I had when I left the Red Eagles and went to the F-15, as great as it was, and it was a great airplane, it still took you a better part of a year to really, really be somebody in it. And 100%. So you can imagine somebody like that going from Ukrainian F6 or MiG-29 into an F-16. I mean, man, this is Christmas time, but man, that's a lot of presents underneath this tree here. I need to learn.
Yeah, I think probably it's like flying it. You know, you plop, any fighter pilot into a new fighter jet, and within a couple rides, you more or less have the handling characteristics down. But when it comes to employing it, like the F-16, between all the sensors, all the weapons, stepping between the different, I mean, there's so many buttons and switches, learning how to employ it.
Yeah. Takes a long time.
That's a lot. So
that's a lot.
Very, very interesting. You brought up early on the mental picture you had built for yourself prior to going to the Red Eagles versus when you showed up and said it was completely different. How was it? What did you think it was going to be, and what was it?
Well, I was in brief to the Red Eagle program, Constant Peg program, when I went through aggressor training in the fall of '81. So I knew about the program. A couple of guys came in briefed us on MiG-21, MiG-23, but they never told us how big the unit was. We knew they had a few airplanes. How many? I didn't know. And where they were at, we vaguely knew where the airfield was, but we never overflew it, even when we went up there and had our one ride. So when I left Clark and I show up at Nellis and I'm getting ready to go up there day one, in my head, I'm thinking, okay, they probably got a couple hangars and 6 or 8 airplanes. Well, I got up there and they had a better part of about almost 20 airplanes and 3 huge hangars, North Complex, South Complex, operations area. There wasn't a whole lot else up there. There was, they hadn't even built a dining hall yet. And the other interesting thing, if you've read the book, is when I step out in the ramp, on the area there at Tonopah Test Range where the Red Eagles had their stuff, 4477th, up to the north of the tower, you could see all this construction going on. And there was all these desert tan hangars going up. And then when I first stepped foot there in October of '83, there were probably about a dozen, maybe a few more than that up there at the time. But you could see construction going on to the north. And you go, man, there's going to be something going on here. And of course, I didn't know what it was, and no one told me. until months later. And getting to your point, what did you conjure up? I didn't know there was going to be another unit there. And that unit, not to keep everyone in suspense, that was the F-117. And it had just gotten operational about the time I set foot on Tonopah Test Range. But they didn't even mention there was an airplane there. But, I mean, these are hangars that I can see. And it was about 5 months later, George Jenner, who was our commander at the time, he looked at myself and 3 other guys and said, okay, on Wednesday night, you're going to stay overnight and you're going to go down to the 44th 50th Tactical Group and you're going to get in briefed on the program. He didn't say what the program was. So we go down there, and again, I won't drag the story out, but that's something I never expected. So, that night when we stayed up there, I got in briefed to the 117. I mean, this is 5 years before it ever became public. And we just went down and we had a briefing, signed all these things away, and question and answer period. And the commander says, okay, let's go down and look at one. So we walked next door. They had their version of their VIP hangar, and here was an F-117 just sitting there. And we crawled over it. I jumped in the cockpit, walked around. There were 2 pilots there telling us, answering questions. So that was something I hadn't expected. And then, of course, we didn't tell anybody about it, but they flew at night. We flew during the daytime, of course. And, so that was one of the other things. But getting back to the MiG program, I never expected it to be that big. Again, I was thinking a dozen airplanes maybe. But yeah, when George Jenner drove me down in his Jeep to the MiG-21 hangar, and these big pocket doors are starting to open up on the hangar, and I look inside, and here's 2 rows of MiG-21s parked nose to nose. Man, my jaw about hit the concrete. And then we walk through a few shops, and we go to the next hangar, and it's all full of MiG-23. So, yeah, I wasn't even close in thinking about what they're like, and then walking up to the airplane, and then sitting in it, and it was just different. And that's when you get your first, okay, this is what it looks like. And you talked about the Cyrillic, all the labels and things like that, and you go, okay, well, I got stick, rudder pedals, throttle. Okay, I can learn the rest of this stuff. And like you said, once you get airborne, if you're in a visual fight and you're used to doing that, it doesn't take you too long. But yeah, the initial concept of what I thought I was going to see was totally off. So
yeah, that'd be
great surprise.
Obviously, you're right into the program, you get hired into, but then also getting mixed in with the F-117 and seeing that program. It had to be, I don't know, maybe a surreal, but also like proud moment. I mean, again, when the United States military wants to do something, I mean, that's impressive to just hear that lineage and that build up there.
Yeah, and it was incredible. And then the other thing too is we had clearance to fly in and out of Area 51. Not that we did on any regularity, but if we had emergency, that's where we go. If we need a long runway, dry lake bed, we go over Area 51. And in the summer of '85, we actually operated out of Area 51 Dreamland for 9 weeks. And I can just tell you all the stories are true. Aliens drink like fish. They drink some really weird stuff. But yeah, it was, so you're right. You kind of put yourself in this totally different environment than what you had ever imagined. I mean, it's one thing to go to Nellis and go to the weapons school, that kind of thing. But then when you go up north and the secrecy and the stuff like that goes on and the trust that they put in you, I mean, I show up there, I'm 29 years old, and I'm, pretty junior captain. But it was a point of pride, and it was a joint Department of Defense program. So we had 3 Navy and 1 Marine Corps pilot there with us all the time. Had to have that one token Marine. And great guys, all of them, just superb. And, but yeah, it was a real source of pride that you would go there and you didn't tell anybody about it because, first off, you had so much pride in the fact that you were part of it. You don't want to jeopardize any of that. And to think that I got to take off every morning, fly up on an MU-2 Mitsubishi turboprop up to Tonopah, get off, do our morning briefing, and then go fly in the morning, afternoon, or pull soft duty or whatever else you did. I go, man, you gotta be kidding me that I got selected to do this. So when I arrived, I was the 15th pilot in the squadron. It was a very, very small squadron. And then they did grow. I think when I left, they might have had, I'm going to hazard a guess, but I think maybe 28, maybe 30 pilots. But we added a few more airplanes along the way. But yeah, pretty small when I first got there, real small.
Well, like General Carlisle on the back of your book there, it says it too, right? It said some captains, majors, the one-off lieutenant colonel here and there, like making all these things happen. I mean, that's true today, right? No matter what program it is, what operation it is, like those are the guys and gals who are making it happen. So obviously to be in that spot is pretty unique and has to be pretty humbling too.
The other thing, let me give a shout out here before I forget, because I'd be remiss if I didn't. To our maintenance guys, because the program literally would never have gotten off the ground without them. So it's one thing to fly an airplane, okay, and you kind of write your own flight manuals. But imagine trying to work on one, put it together, and then keep it running without any technical manuals. So luckily, as with pilots, the Red Eagle program pretty much had its pick of the Air Force. If they wanted somebody, they would reach out and grab them from somewhere and go, would you be interested in coming to Nellis? And usually the carrot was, hey, you can be there for an extended tour. And so for most people, that was a pretty good deal. Some of the people came right from Nellis. We had quite a few maintenance technicians came right from the Thunderbirds, great people. But a lot of them just throughout TAC, to other places, hydraulic specialists, engine specialists, you name it. And they all melded together. And again, I had 476 sorties. My landings equaled my takeoffs. Only had one real major emergency in that whole time on the MiG-23. But that was a testament to those people that did that. In fact, the one thing that we did, and George Jenin, great commander, by the way, probably the best commander I ever had anywhere. And I don't say that lightly because I had some really good ones, but to give somebody also an idea of what that program was like, and obviously unlike any other squadron in the entire Air Force, but he owned everything. He owned maintenance, he owned operations, he owned GCI, he had all the intel people. So it was almost like he was a mini wing commander. He had all these assets, and he was responsible. And he oftentimes would get called directly by, at the time, TAC Commander George Wilbur Creech rather. But I'll say one thing, just getting to George Jenin, and he was a stickler. He was an F4 fighter weapons school guy. He had 3 tours in the Phantom in Vietnam, 450 missions, 100 over North Vietnam. I mean, talking about some credentials.
Yeah.
But anyway, he told me, and as he told everybody, he said, there was one thing we will not do here at Tonopah. And he was upfront about it. He says, and this is in direct violation of Air Force regs. And, I'm like, wow, what's this? He says, while you are here, you will never do a walk-around inspection of that airplane. I said, whoa. And he went on, and this all gets back to maintenance. He told me, when they pull that airplane out of the hangar, it's ready to go. If you do a walk-around inspection, that's an affront to them. So I'm telling you, don't ever walk around that airplane doing an inspection. So I never did. 3 years, I never did a walk-around inspection of any airplane I flew at Tonopah.
And you made it. Look at that.
Never, no regrets. In
That
fact,
might be
yeah.
Go ahead. I was because that'd be a good segue. Maybe just talk about the program inception, procurement, because the maintenance piece is one. If we jump back to Ukraine, right? I was thinking like to keep these planes flying is a tremendous feat. It is a tremendous feat in the United States Air Force, the United States Navy, whatever it might be, where we send maintenance personnel to specific schools for specific planes. They come back, get on-the-job training from guys and gals who have been working on this plane their entire career, et cetera. They make it all go around, right? But I can only imagine, boom, here's this new plane. Oh, by the way, the manuals don't exist in English, or maybe there is some translation here and there, but the parts and pieces are in Cyrillic or whatever it might be. Not an easy thing to figure out. I can't imagine that it would be. And then the logistics side of the house, having the parts availability, et cetera,
Right.
all these things come into play when it makes it happen. Obviously, it worked out quite well. Again, it's a testament to the people of the program, but maybe we just kind of jump back to some of the inception, the acquisition, and how all this thing kind of got put together. If you can dive into that just a little bit.
Yeah, I'll just do a quick kind of run people back to its infancy. Of course, that was well before I got there, but the concept, mid 1970s, Top Gun had been around, aggressors, red flag, all those things are in place right now. But what they didn't have is they didn't have the real thing. And the Air Force had a handful, and when I say handful, 3 airplanes. They had a MiG-21, 2 MiG-17s early on, have donut, have drill programs, things like that. But they were really on the test side of the Air Force Systems Command back in the day. And they did some exploitation, but it never really translated over to TAC or the Navy. So in the halls of the Pentagon in the mid-late 70s, people had been talking for years, hey, they knew they had a handful of MiGs. Wouldn't it be cool if we get a real squadron? Well, that's the genesis of the idea. It's like, how do we get this? And then luckily some high-ranking senior officers, 1 and 2 stars, 3 stars, at the Pentagon said, yeah, you know what? You can find us an airfield. We'll get the MiGs for you. General Donnelly, who was, I think he was plans or whatever. Anyway, so they did. And that's where it came from. So in 1977, the squadron was born. Basically, it started up at Nellis. Actually started off as the 44th, 77th Test and Evaluation Flight. It wasn't even a squadron. About a year and a half, 2 years later, they said, well, let's make it a squadron. They actually started up operations in, I believe it was 1979. They actually started flying airplanes out of Tonopah. Because when they first found the airfield, it was only a 6,000-foot strip by operated by Sandia Laboratories. Yeah. So they found this up in the northwest corner of the Nellis Ranges, and they go, we can't fly MiGs out of here. We can't even fly jets out of here. So they lengthened it to 10,000 feet. In 79, they started flying on July 79. So fast forward, they got airplanes. They had a handful of them. But they had to start. If they want to make a big squadron, they need to go out abroad and go find some. So, if you read the book, there's a whole chapter dedicated to just the assets. And it's one of 2 chapters in the whole book that I did not eyewitness myself. Everything else I was there for. But it was such an important part of the program, I felt writing the book, it would be a disservice if I didn't mention the people who went out and got those airplanes and where they got them from. And some of the stories are just incredible, and I had to fly to different places, Vegas and elsewhere, to track down some of these maintenance guys who were actually on these airplanes that went and got them. But the majority of the MiG-21s they got, MiG-21 F-13 models, we got from Indonesia, where guys flew into Jakarta, went to a different airfield, got a bunch. Old MiG-21s, U.S. made them a good deal. They couldn't refuse. We'll give you some brand new F5s for these old MiG-21s. They said, sure, good deal. And so C5 lands, the nose opens, off roll 4 or 5 brand new F5s, and off and unload these old crated up MiG-21s, parts, engines, you name it. Okay, that went on a couple times. And then later on, the rest of the MiG-21s, and actually to be technically correct, they weren't MiG-21s, but we got some brand new airplanes. They looked like MiG-21s, but technically they were F-7s. We got them right from Red China. And a guy by the name of Jim Bell, JB, great guy. He was, there's a long story behind how I found out about this story, which is best said over a few beers. But he was on the first of three C-5s that went into Beijing and uploaded those airplanes under the cover of darkness, 3 or 4 at a time. C-5 lands at like 10:30 at night. They taxi to the north end of the Beijing ramp. All kinds of crates out there. Big nose opens. They start loading these things, and by 4:30 in the morning, they're airborne on their way to Clark. So that's how they got the majority of the MiG-21s, MiG-21/F-7s. The MiG-23s all came from Egypt, and that was basically really good work by our CIA station chief in Cairo, a guy by the name of Jim Fees in 1970s. Actually started probably 1975, 76. He'd been working with Anwar Sadat and Hosni Mubarak, who at the time was the vice president of Egypt, had been the Air Force Chief of Staff of the Egyptian Air Force. And they had a big rift with the Soviet Union. They basically kicked out 20,000 plus Soviet advisors in about, I think it was 1975, 76. And so Jim Fees saw this as a great opportunity to kind of get in bed with the Egyptians and what can we do for you guys if you'll give us those airplanes? And what the trade was, I think that it was called Project Pharaoh. We traded them a whole lot of F-4Es for MiG-23s, and all with a promise of F-16s to follow. And we all know that all came true. So that's how we got the airplanes, and with it, engines. But getting back to your earlier point, the challenge was, okay, how are you going to keep them flying? You can't call Moscow and say, hey, I need a hydraulic pump for this MiG-23 MS over here. So by hook and crook, a lot of back channel. I'm sure there's a lot of money that went under the table somewhere. But they got parts, and the parts they couldn't obtain, they made, in large part. The engine maintenance was something they couldn't do. And for that, they had some Black World contracts with people like GE. GE has a facility at Edwards North, and they did all the engine maintenance for our MiGs. So I'm sure there was a select handful of people there that, obviously sworn to secrecy, but they would get these engine containers, take them apart, and voila, here's an R-29 engine here. Well, I think this belongs in a flogger. Wonder where this came from. And they'd work on it. They had to make and actually fashion some of their own turbine blades, things like that. So there was a lot of stuff that went into it too. You think about the money that had to go into things just like that. If you think somebody like GE to actually make and machine turbine blades for an engine they don't own, what do you think the cost of that was, even back in that day? So, yeah, but the maintenance guys were fantastic. Like I said, never did a walk around, but they were great. It was one big family up there.
I think a testament to the fact that, again, when we want to do something, we usually find a way, but the amount of the different agencies involved in this, the funding that's involved with this, again, I can just picture of the challenges that would be if you proposed an idea, like, hey, I got a good idea, I want to do this. And it's going to involve a lot of different agencies. It's going to involve a lot of different money, funding, et cetera, like building an airfield, or, acquiring an airfield more or less from another, government associated, affiliated, entity, absorbing into there's so many pieces here that makes my mind hurt thinking of how you navigate that.
As I go around the country and I do different presentations, I talk a little bit about that history, of course, go into a little bit more detail, but just to what you were saying there, to make sure all these dominoes fall in direction like they should be with all these different agencies was a minor miracle. And one of the things that probably really pushed it over the hump was the fact that an inner circle in the Pentagon knew back in 1975, 76 that the 117 was coming down the pipe. It was gonna show up, but only a handful of people knew about it. So knowing that they needed a place to bed that airplane down actually helped a lot, because it's almost like a symbiotic relationship. You had the MiGs there, And that was a great reason, and because for having those things there, and the 117s were at the north side of the ramp, and
Right.
so it worked out well. We'll fly the MiGs in the morning, we'll fly the 117s at night. It's a restricted airfield. No one's going to get in or out without us knowing about it. And it was pretty cool. Again, I had to kind of pinch myself to even think I was really there. And then the fact that we're going to go operate out of dreamland, it's like, are you kidding me? And, there were other programs that went on too that I really didn't even touch about in the book. But, people traveling around the world, going to different places, checking out this, checking out that. I was about to go to a country which I won't name in North Africa, summer of '85, to lend some assistance to their Air Force and teach them a little bit about flying air to air and things like that. And oh, by the way, they all happen to just fly the later versions of the MiG-21. So I was stoked. I go, this is going to be great. And 2 weeks before I left, they said, nah, the State Department's having second thoughts on it. So I didn't go, but we had programs like that going on. People would go around the world, and, I had a State Department, passport at the ready to go anywhere I went. And I made a couple trips, Europe, Pacific. Yeah, so, for a young captain, geez, are you kidding me?
Yeah, it's very cool. A lot of tentacles. Every country does it, right? But again, there's a lot of tentacles out there. There's a lot of cool things that will probably never see the light of day. People just get to do some cool stuff and see some pretty amazing things. It's cool to be able to talk about this. I would like to dive a little bit into the MiG-23. Before we do that, though, so everyone kind of rolled into the program, checked out as a MiG-21 pilot.
Yep.
Is that true? And then you would move on to the MiG-23. Is that fair?
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, that was the route you went. Everyone started the MiG-21, and not everyone went to the MiG-23. Some people by choice. Some people didn't want to fly it. But I looked at it and I go, it's right there. Why wouldn't I fly it? Yeah, it's not going to be, as much fun as a MiG-21, but to have it right there and be able to say you flew it, and then be able to take those experiences and pass them on to people down the road, I thought, well, I'd be remiss if I didn't do it. So from the day I showed up, I want to fly the MiG-21, obviously, and if I had the chance, I told the operations officer, when the time comes, I want to go fly it. So with 11 months ago, I went and checked out in the MiG-23, and very similar to the MiG-21, I stepped out of the MiG-21. My last flight was on a Thursday. A week later, the following Thursday, I took off in the MiG-23 for the first time. So 1 week, jumping out of one jet, getting into another, taking off. And of course, now getting into my MiG-23, a much more complex airplane. It's kind of like, I don't think it's a stretch to say, it's kind of like going from a T-38 to a Phantom.
Okay.
38, simple, right? Crank a J-85s up, you take off, nothing to it. It's kind of like the MiG-21. Now, you jump out of T-38, and whether you go to Phantom or your F-16, you go, whoa, a whole new ball game. So that's again, no simulators, no two-seat trainers, just, buckle down, study, go through your, hangar flying again, do your engine runs, taxi runs, high speed. And you had to get used to a much bigger airplanes, more sluggish, a lot easier to handle on the ground. I actually did have nose wheel steering. So thank God for that. They had to. It was just too big. You couldn't do that with pneumatic brakes.
When you say more complicated, you make that analogy to the F4. From outsider looking in, right? Literally, I've only seen the outside. I've sat in a MiG-21 at the petting zoo, and I can only this is an ergonomic nightmare is the only thing that comes to my mind. But the complexity piece, is that in the systems in employing the jet or physically flying the jet? What made it, I guess, so much more cumbersome or a pain to learn and fly?
Yeah, Rain, it was actually a combination of all that. The systems, again, you got variable geometry wings. You've got a much bigger engine. Of course, an engine's an engine once you get it running, but how you handled it. And then just physically flying the airplane. Again, if you remember what I had said earlier, you could take the MiG-21 and once you're below corner velocity, just pull a stick back, run out of airspeed, no big deal. You didn't dare do that with MiG-23. You were very angle of attack limited in the high OAA regime. And you had AOA limitations and G limits for every configuration you're in. So you had one set of limitations at wings full forward at 16 degrees, another one for wings back at 45, and then altogether different ones for back at 72. So you had to be kind of up on your game all the time on where you were, what you're doing. Again, like a lot of things, once you're in an engagement, you're probably not going to be moving those wings a whole lot. You're probably going to enter the engagement at 45 degrees, and if you decide to bug out, real quickly as you bug out and unload, you're going to be moving that wing selection, wing sweep lever back to 72, and you're just going to, look up in your periscope, and you can see those wings slowly moving back. And also you have a gauge up to your lower right side of your heads-up display. It's going to show you where your wings are at, because you couldn't physically see them in the cockpit, because the headrest came right here, and I could see about my 3 o'clock and my 9, and that's about it. So I couldn't see the top of my airplane or even my wingtips, even with them full forward, without having that periscope. So for all those different things, you think about, well, man, the MiG-21 didn't have a periscope, you didn't have swing wings, you didn't have a radar, didn't have INS. That was basic VFR fighter. Now you get to the MiG-23, and although we didn't fly at IMC, but it was just, and it felt heavier. It felt very much even heavier than the Phantom. Phantom actually was agile compared to the MiG-23. The MiG-23 didn't have ailerons; it had spoilers. So you want to roll the airplane, that's not near as crisp as having something with ailerons on it. So you had and those really worked. You had spoilers that worked obviously all the time when the wings were full forward, and then a little less so when you got back to 45. And then once you got back to 72 degrees, spoilers didn't work at all. All you had is differential stabilizer to roll the airplane. And unlike the MiG-21, Phantom, and everything else I flew, you didn't dare use the rudder. You didn't want to induce any kind of yaw into that airplane at high angle of attack, which was just the opposite of the MiG-21. So it took you a while to kind of go, okay, I've got to. So the first few times you fly, you're more than a little bit cautious, because you go, okay, I don't want to be the idiot that departs it on leg 1 or 2 and puts it in a spin. But and I will say this, having flown the Phantom, and I want the listeners and the viewers to listen to this carefully. The Phantom and the MiG-23 had similarities up to a point. If I think about back when I flew a hard wing F4 C and D model with an airplane without leading edge slats, which I later had on the F4E, the Phantom and the MiG-23 kind of turned about the same rate. It's like a hard wing F4. So in that regard, they felt kind of similar. But that's kind of where the similarities stopped. But the F4 also had a nasty departure characteristic, much like the MiG-23, where if you were, it took you one time in RTU to figure this out, and you never did again the rest of your career. But in the F4, you put a hard turn, you started loading up the F4 and went to high AOA, and you wanted to put aileron in to increase your roll rate. If you didn't put the rudder in first, you're going for a ride. And that was a real quick departure. The MiG-23 was the same thing. It would depart. Now, I never departed the MiG-23. I came really close. I was right up there at about 27, almost 28 units angle of attack. And I had the knuckle wrapper going on the stick to let me know tactically, okay, if I'm looking outside or up in the periscope, I feel this, I go, okay, my AOA is getting pretty high. I go, yeah, better watch it. But it would tell you that. But that's where the similarities of the Phantom and the MiG-23 stop. But if you had to recover from a departure or a spin, there were some similarities there as well. But unlike the Phantom, if you're a high angle attack, you didn't dare put the rudder in the MiG-23. That would, and yaw, you're going for Mr. Toad's or Wild Ride. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's dive down into this just a little bit. So, you've mentioned a couple things for those who are, pilots or not necessarily familiar. One, you mentioned corner velocity. So I'll give a comparison. The F-16 has a range 330 to 440. If you stay inside that range, you're gonna get your best rate. So degrees around the circle per second. Some weapons officers cringing at me, hear me say that, but more or less, right? I can get my nose around the fastest if I stay in that speed range if we're in a dogfight. Also in the F-16, I didn't touch the rudder until I started doing demo, and then I used it in rejoins when I'm rejoining with a Mustang or something because it would slow me down. Most F-16 pilots can't find the rudder pedals, right? So other attacks, right? It's just something when you're flying fighters, most of the time you're not using the rudders, and that kind of gets to the point where you're talking about departure. So losing control, going into a spin, for lack of a better phrase, but when you get that high angle of attacks, you're slow, and then you induce yaw by stepping on the rudder or maybe some roll. That's when you can put the plane into a spin. The F-16 it's pretty good. It's challenging to do that. They do have some courses where guys go do that. I think a D model with a centerline bag is like the most susceptible to going out of control in the F-16. And you do it you practice in the simulator. I would imagine if you departed in a MiG-23, you probably need a lot of altitude. I just feel like that thing is it's a big clunky thing that if you're in the mid-teens, there's a decent chance that you're going to be getting a tie tack as your recovery, I guess, method or your consolation prize there.
Yeah.
So maybe we dive into just the weeds a little bit when we talk about cornering velocity or how you're flying the MiG-23 versus the MiG-21. You already said, hey, if you get below corner, I think they're in like the T-38 where there's no limiter. I think it's below 300 knots. I can go full aft stick, and I'm not going to over-G the plane. It's like kind of one of the things you do there. But maybe dive into some of those aspects.
Yeah, the MiG-21, I can't remember a hard number for a corner velocity, but it seems to me it's up there 360, 380, somewhere right in there.
Yeah,
it's kind of, a Clean Eagle was kind of up there, and depending on which engines, 380, something like that. So. Yeah, once you get down below that in the MiG-21, and we would typically start all our engagements at 400 knots, because no matter what you're flying against, we figure, okay, you're going to be pretty close to your corner velocity no matter what you're flying. I don't care if you're flying a Phantom or whatever, you're going to be, at least you're going to be within spitting distance of your corner velocity, probably a little higher. So, for instance, when I was flying the MiG-21, if I was defensive out in front, we do a perch setup, and have you rein back at my 8 o'clock, 9,000 feet, and then start a nice, easy left-hand turn. And as you close to 9,000 feet, fights on. Well, as soon as we hit 9,000 feet, the fights on call, I go right into, 7 Gs right away. Okay. I was a little over my corner velocity, so I don't want to bend the airplane. I could have over that, but we normally kept it below 7 Gs. And again, some of these are old airframes, so, probably better like 6, 7, no more than that. But I'd turn right into it. But the thing about it, real quickly in the MiG-21, is you're bleeding off a lot of energy. You got that kind of delta airfoil shape. I'm bleeding off close to 40, 50 knots a second on that airplane. But now my turn rate's pretty darn good. I mean, it's not like a Viper. But I'm 18 to 19 degrees a second. I'm coming around pretty good. And the other thing, too, when you're losing, as you know, you're all of a sudden you go from 400 knots, and just a couple of seconds later, you're down to 350. A couple of seconds later, down to 300 knots. What happens to your turn circle? It gets really small. So you couple the tight turn circle with that small, 24 foot wingspan for somebody who's on the attack who's never seen this airplane before. And it gets a lot of attention real quick because now I'm down below 300 knots, and about as I'm passing 280, 260, I drop my flaps, which are Fowler flaps. I just drop them down. And now I can just stand it on its tail. And if you overshoot, I'm coming right back single circle with you. Or if you come off of me, I can go out, unload the airplane, dump the flaps up, accelerate, and come right back into you. So that's when we talk about corner velocity. That's what we have in mind as far as max perform in the airplane. Now, and the same thing goes if I in the MiG-21 was attacking you back at your 7, 8 o'clock for 9,000 feet. As soon as I close inside, my flaps are up. I'm still going. I'm at full afterburn. I'm probably accelerating now over 400, 450. And I'm watching what you're doing. You're doing your good job. Lift vector is on, slightly below me. I got to come off. Well, if you really see me, pork this thing, you may come back single circle with me in the Viper. You'd probably be pretty good at that. Other people would say, his nose is off. If he's really good, you might want to just get your energy back and come back at him again if he continues the attack. Because too many times, and we would teach this, the first day of when new squadrons would show up, we'd teach them, this, and usually in the down at the threat training facility in the auditorium there, in a classified environment, and we get the sticks out, and show them how to do things. But we tell them, what? If you're out there defensive and his nose comes off, you might want to get your energy back before you think about coming single circle with this guy. Because he's probably not your third world country MiG-21 pilot. It's a Red Eagle out here who's flown this airplane and maybe yours a lot. So, and that usually worked out pretty good. Those who said, I don't believe you guys, I'm going to go single circle, it usually didn't work out well. So, I don't know if that answers your question. But conversely, MiG-23, we never put the MiG-23 out front because it just wasn't a contest. I mean, anyone could get inside the MiG-23's turn circle. You just saddle right up, If he was just going and saying, okay, I see an F-16 back here. Heck, I don't even know how he'd even see you, except in his periscope. He couldn't see you, unless his wingman, if he had one, called, hey, break, and he'd come into his turn and kind of, that's just helping you out because you're going to saddle right on up.
Yeah, so how did you guys employ the MiG-21 versus the MiG-23 for the training purposes there, right? Again, that kind of paints a picture. If you've got a big, again, I'm going to use the term, like a school bus there, or a MiG-23 just can't see anything behind them. Yeah. What is the effective training profile that you guys utilize to help pilots out?
Well, like I said earlier, the MiG-21, always perch setups, offensive, defensive, depending which one. Usually if let's say I meet up with you and we just said finish a 2v2 intercept, and then 2v2 intercept is over, we do 180, knock it off, we go on. I have you come up on my frequency, I take you up to range 71, my partner, he takes your wingman down to range 76 or whatever, and then you're up on my frequency, and if it's the first time you've seen the MiG-21 or the MiG-23, but in today's example, use MiG-21, I'll just make sure we're in radio contact, and you have a tally-ho on me, roger, okay, I'm going to easy left-hand turn, join up a loose fingertip formation. And that gives you an opportunity, the first time you see this MiG-21, it's got a big red star in the tail, and usually you can almost see the eyes get big behind their oxygen mask. And I just say, hey, we're just fly right alongside, just take a good look at it. Because it's a lot smaller. We're not going to talk about, ComSec. Well, we're not going to mention the word MiG on the radio. But, you go underneath me, take a look, and then after a while we'll say, okay, now let's do something like this. Let's start an acceleration demonstration, and we'll both be at full mil power. Or actually, we'll start about 250 knots, 300 knots, I believe is what we were at, because that's where I had you rejoin at. 300 knots. I want you to move it out just a little bit wider than fingertip, maybe a loose formation. And at 3, 2, 1, at 1, we'll both select full afterburner, and then we're going to do an acceleration demo. And we'll do an acceleration demo at 1G, just seeing, hey, how fast does that MiG accelerate versus my F-16? And most people were shocked to find out that, damn, that thing's right with me. Okay, pretty good. And we did an F-15, F-14, F-18, you name it. We did with everybody. And then at the end of that, we'd say, okay, let's take it all the way to 450 knots. And at 450, was bring them both up to 60 degrees nose high, and we're going to keep going 60 degrees nose high until we get down to about 300 knots, and I'm going to roll off, and I want you to roll right behind me. And in your roll, I want you to pick up maybe 2,000 feet. And then I'm going to level off down here at about 20,000 feet. I'm going to pick up 400 knots, and at 400 knots, I want you back here about a couple thousand feet, and I'm going to lay a hard turn on you and see if you can track me through it. So that's kind of your first look at a MiG-21. And then if we had a little bit of fuel, then I'd say, okay, let's set up for an offensive or defensive. And I'd always give you the option. What do you want? And I usually suggest, why don't you be offensive on me? I'll be defensive first, and we'll go from that. And then you kind of warm up. It'd be kind of unfair to put you out front right away. You've never seen this airplane. You go, hey, what's going on? So that's how we do it. And we'd have, again, that 9,000 foot perch setup, hard turn, fights on, unrestricted maneuvering. Of course, rules of the ROE still applies. But other than that, man, go for it. And our charter in the Red Eagles was to show every pilot that we flew against the best flown MiG they're ever going to see. And we really believe that. I don't think, obviously it's hard to say, but I really doubt anybody flew those airplanes as hard as we did. Because no one had the experience of coming from F5s, F4s, F15s, F-16s, the Navy guys, F-14s, F-18s, things like that. So you put that kind of caliber of pilot into an airframe that's as forgiving, as lethal as MiG-21, pretty darn good training aid. Now, the MiG-23 was totally different. Like we already alluded to, it wasn't the agile fighter. So if you think of the MiG-23 as really an interceptor, then you kind of start understanding where we're coming from. And it did that better probably than anything. Fastest airplane I've ever flown. 2.35 at 40,000 feet, straight and level, and still moving. Could have gone faster. 830 knots on the deck, still going faster. I think Ted Drake, who I talked to earlier, I think he saw a 910 one day by mistake. But so it would
I was
go.
Say, I mean, low 20s, Viper's 800 knots. I got 760 knots. I did 2.05 up high.
Yeah.
But you hear the wind rush at 760 knots.
Yeah.
I mean, before that, which I don't know. I was like, you know what? Yeah, that's probably fast.
That's fast enough, yeah. Yeah. So, but the MiG-23, again, we would never put it out front because it just wasn't, it's not a contest. So we would set it up, you would be out front, 9,000 feet, nice, easy turn. And now you can see me easily. Obviously, you can see me when I'm dead six, but in an easy turn. And then, okay, fight's on. I'm already at 400 knots. You're at 400 knots. You lay your 9G turn on to me. There's no way. I don't have a hope in hell of making that turn, even in a MiG-21 or an F-15 or another F-16. I'm just not going to make it. So I got to come out of plane, or I'm just going to reverse, and I'm just going to put my wings back to 72, and I'm out of the fight. It's not much of a challenge, for you, even defensive. In fact, we would always say, if you can see the flogger, you're offensive. Because you can see him. You can defeat him. You certainly get him. Unless you just happen to stay in plane with him and he tries to take a snapshot on you. If you never get out of plane, well, even as poorly as he turns, he may still turn on the gun, well outside there and shoot you in the face as you're coming through, you've come through already 100 degrees of turn. But, that's about it. So there would be times where, and I make mention of it one time in the book, where I was fighting against an Eagle, and he did a hard turn on me. I'm in a MiG-23 interceptor model, air-to-air jet, MS model, and he's in a hard left-hand turn, and I'm coming through, but I've got to start coming out of plane. And as soon as I started coming out of plane, he reverses right then. And rather than unload and accelerate out and then come back, he just reversed, expecting me to be bugging out at his 4 or 5 o'clock. Well, I wasn't there. As soon as I saw him unload and roll, I just took the MiG-23 and went straight up. And so now he's looking back for me, expecting me to be back at 4 or 5 o'clock. Well, there's no MiG-23 there. And now he's come back. He's pissed away a bunch of energy. He unloaded, rolled it again, loaded up, pissed away a lot more energy. And by now, when he finally does see me 6,000 or 7,000 feet above him, he's down to 250 knots. He can't even then get his nose up that high. And so as I'm coming over the top, thinking, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I got an F-15 out in front of me. I'm going to gun. It's never been done before to MiG-23. So anyway, I'll let the readers or the viewers read the book, but I came on down and I couldn't believe my good fortune. I got an F-15. He can't get his nose. He's flailing. He's doing the funky chicken. And first time ever, I think I came out of Afterburn, the MiG-23, even put the speed brakes on so I wouldn't overrun him. And I mean, really, no kidding. I'm not exaggerating on that because you just don't do it because, usually you're used to, folding your wings and going. So now I'm coming back and I'm rolling in. I'm just getting inside 2,000 feet and I've got I'm looking at a tennis court out in front of me and I hear, knock it off, bingo fuel. I'm thinking, there is no way that eagle's bingo fuel, but it is what it is. So
There was no way he was going back after.
He was not going to go back with his tail between his legs and show up at the old club as the only guy that ever got gunned by a MiG-23.
Oh, that's brutal. I mean, again, those are the type things that I think, too, in the book, how you write, at least me, I can picture that whole thing unfolding and also just envision what's going on inside the cockpit of that F-15 when he's lost sight and is losing the fight, we might say.
Yeah.
So.
Nothing is. We all know. We've all been there.
Oh,
there's nothing worse, as I mentioned probably several times in the book. There is nothing worse for a fighter pilot than you're out of hopes, and ideas, and you're about to get gun tracked, and it's just the worst feeling. Those 3 words, gun track and kill, are the worst of anything.
I'll pile into that. It's like when you lose sight and you have to call no joy. You spend about 2 potatoes and you're defensive, and now you got to fess up that you're no joy.
Yeah,
and then you hear continue. So the offender's
That's very
still
true.
It's like, oh man,
this is gonna hurt.
Continue. You're like, oh well, that's great. So you see me and I don't see you. I would like to ask, as we kind of get towards the end here, 2 things that might be the same one, but the most harrowing sortie, and it could be an emergency or just something that happened. I imagine you probably at least have one. And then 2, the most memorable sortie while you were in the Red Eagle program. Or, we can even expand it because, again, you got to fly a lot of cool jets between the F4, F5, MiG-21, MiG-23, F-15. So those are kind of the 2 questions that I would like to ask as we start to wrap up here. What most harrowing sortie you had in the Red Eagle time? I think you mentioned you at least had one emergency.
Yeah, it would be that emergency in a MiG-23. And the short of it is I was out and doing an intercept. It was a 2v2. It was myself and my wingman, Gary Craig Goldie, was flying a MiG-21. We're doing a 2v2 against a pair of F-15s. I don't even remember what squadron, where they're from. But as I'm coming on to them about 15 miles out, I'm hauling ass. I'm down the low block. I'm doing 650. Wings are back at 72. I'm coming back nose on. As I'm looking out through the top of the canopy, a bright light comes on. And it's the master caution light. And I'll look at it and go, well, this can't be good. So look down there, and it's blinking is what it does actually in the MiG-23. It blinks. Actually, a little oral, you can kind of hear it clicking too. So I look down, and there's, like all fighters, we got a little telelight panel down here right above on the right forward console. Slightly above and outside of my right leg. And I look on it, and there's a light there, and it's, other than the engine fail light, the one you don't want to see is main hydraulic, and because main hydraulics, as the name would imply, powers a lot of really important stuff on the MiG-23, the most important of which is your wings. And so that was a harrowing one, and I immediately called knock it off, and just instinctive, your hands, feet, whatever, are doing things in the cockpit just based on training and experience. So I immediately called knock it off, roll the airplane, point it back towards Tonopah, about 30, 40 miles north of us at the time. And I just take all my airspeed because I figure whatever I've got, altitude right now, no matter what's going to go on, is going to be my friend. So just instinctive, just zoom the airplane, convert 650 knots, lose 400 of that, go all the way up to like 20,000 feet. And all in idle, engines back at idle. And I'm just zooming, go up 20,000 feet. Now I'm back at 250 knots, heading back. And I'm looking to try to find out, okay, I've got a main hydraulic light on. But what does that really mean? All I know is the immediate action is wings full forward. And that was it. You had to get the wings forward. If you can't get the wings forward, you can't land the airplane. Because even the Soviet designers go, there's no way you can land this thing at 45. I mean, no one's going to touch down at 240 knots. It's just not possible. Well,
that was my question. What's the normal landing speed then? Yeah, if you had a full wing sweep back.
Yeah, full wings full forward. Normal touchdown speed is about 140 knots in the MiG-23.
Okay. Yeah.
So I won't belabor all of it, but I'm looking out, and here's the cool thing. You talked about the periscope earlier. And because you can't see much of anything outside of the flogger, and this is, I think, my 21st flight in the flogger. It was actually on April Fool's Day, April 1st, 1986. And I'd already flown twice that day. This is my third hop in the afternoon. We were last guys airborne. I look up in the periscope as I'm in this big zoom going up to 20,000 feet or whatever my airspeed will allow me. And I look up in the periscope because there's nowhere else to look. I can look at I've got a hydraulic gauge right in front of the stick. And it's one gauge, it's got two needles on it, one for main, and that's about 0 or close to 0. And the other one is a boost, which is the only thing keeping me afloat right now. And that's hanging in there, between 180 and 200 square centimeters of kilograms per square centimeter. Anyway, that's hanging in there. But I'm looking at this little gauge, and I go, well, okay, it's going down to 0. But so I've got a leak somewhere, but I just, how am I going to see it? Well, I look up in there in periscope, and what I see on my left wing root is this grayish cloud. It looks like a little cloud attached to the leading edge. And what that is, that's hydraulic fluid being atomized. It's just coming out into the slipstream at still now over 500 knots. It's just a little cloud. And I go, well, okay, well, I know where the leak is at, but nothing I can do about it. So anyway, make it back toward, I get, knock it off. My wingman rejoins on me with the help of GCI, comes up, looks me over, does his, over and under type thing, and comes back, and he says, man, your top of your left wing is in the side of your fuselage is just covered in hydraulic fluid. But he says, but not anymore, because it's just, it's gone. So, but nothing you can do. Luckily, in that time, the wings made it full forward, so hey, I got one less thing to worry about. At least no immediate concerns about jumping out of the airplane. But now you got to, okay, I'm not gonna have any leading or trailing edge flaps. I'm gonna have to blow down the gear, and then do a controllability check. And the controllability check is at 220 knots to see if the airplane will fly and be controllable at 220. Because I've lost a lot of stuff. Okay. I've got differential stabilators. I've got a little bit of spoilers there. No rudder. Not that it did me much good anyway. But I do a controllability check. That's fine. And without anything else, I've got enough fuel, but we've only got one runway. And so, talking to the SOF, we decide that I'm going to have Goldie land first in his MiG-21 because there's nothing more he can do for me. So we have him land first in case I close the runway, and then where's he going to go? So he lands first, and then I set up in about a 4 or 5 mile final, and I come on down, and my speed on final is 220 with a touchdown of 190. So think about it. My normal touchdown speed is 140, so I'm 50 knots over what my normal is. And the MiG-23 on a normal day is pretty squirrely. You got those high wings. You all you have is spoilers. Okay, you've got this narrow gear. Luckily, that day there wasn't any crosswind. So you've got all that, and the airplane still wants to fly. So I've got to get on the ground. I'm a high-speed tricycle in a way. But I make it down. I touch down just where I want. be real careful because you don't want to bounce going that fast because you're going to get airborne. And without all the flight controls that I no longer had, it's going to be a real handful. So luckily, I touched down real nice and gingerly, and get the nose on, and I pop the drag chute, and boom, I feel the tug, and I look in the periscope, and I can see big parachute back there, and I go, hey, this is working out good. In fact, it worked out so well, I didn't even have to use the emergency brakes, which was all I had. But I taxied off the airfield, and just didn't bother dropping a chute, but all kinds of fire vehicles and stuff like that, and I shut down, and that was it. That was pretty close. No one had ever had that, and no one had that since that time. And what they found out, what the cause was in the left wing root, in the left wing pylon they had there, years ago they had this wiring harness that they had used, or probably had never used. And when they got them from Egypt, after whatever they did with them exploitation-wise, they took that off and probably just push it up into the wing glove, and there it sat for years. And then little by little, as the wings kept coming back and forward, something in that wiring bundle must have grabbed. And as the wings came back on my flight, it was enough, because at the end of that wiring bundle was a big plug, and that thing just pulled through. There's 4 hydraulic lines that go through the wing root that are about the size of my fingers here. Main and boost, outgoing and in return. And 2 of those in the main had just been ripped apart. And had it gone any further, it would have taken out the boost. But I didn't find that out till like the next day when I was, everything's good. Went to the club that night, pounded a bunch of beers, a couple shots if I remember right, went up the next day and started flying again. Right. Well, the next day, the assistant maintenance officer comes into where I'm sitting, and he carries 2 things. One was that jagged piece of metal with those 4 hydraulic lines, 2 of which are jagged metal, and then some other thing, which was that big giant plug about the size of your fist. He says, throws it on my desk, and he says, this is what was yanked through there. Had that happened when I got on the ground and I put the wings back to 72 to taxi in, I would have had a hydraulic problem, but no big deal. Just have somebody tow me in. But luckily it happened there, and luckily I was able to get the wings forward. Probably another couple of minutes, probably wouldn't have had it. So, that was, although at the time, it didn't seem like a big deal, but when you look back and you go, man, that was pretty small margin for getting without, but that's really the only serious emergency I had in MiG-23 or MiG-21. Never had anything in MiG-21. Yeah,
that's definitely a testament to the maintenance piece. A little bit of luck there too, but I mean, too, it's like when you say you look back onto it. I mean, what you're doing flying fighters day in and day out, you're operating at razor's edge. Between just a couple things lining up, not going your way, and what was an uneventful day is now a catastrophic emergency, et cetera. But, it's just a Tuesday, right? Just another Tuesday. But looking back, man, could have been differently.
Yeah, and I'm sure you can attest to this, looking at the things you've done. But people say, well, aren't you worried or afraid? And I tell them, I go, I don't know any fighter pilot, any good ones, that are afraid to go out and jump in their jet. And in fact, that's where you feel the best. You don't really want to get out of that airplane unless you absolutely have to. So, I don't know. Maybe it's a big sky theory. Maybe rather be lucky than good. But I never even worried about it. It's like, hey, it's going to happen. I've been trained. I can handle it. I've had emergencies in the F4 where I've been in the barrier any number of times, having almost complete hydraulic failure in a Phantom and taking the cable like Kunsan, and hey, you just do what you need to do. If this doesn't work, you go around, try it again, and if it doesn't, punch out if you have to.
Yeah. It's kind of weird. I mean, I think we do such a good job of training, doing the sims and stuff. And obviously, the jet, your heart rate's probably going to be a little bit elevated. But I don't know. I guess fortunately, I haven't had any like crazy barn burners. My motors always kept turning in the Viper, which was a nice thing. But, I had some generator issues and things like that over spots in the world that I didn't necessarily want to have issues. But You just kind of go through the checklist.
Yeah.
Again, nothing like your main hydraulic system with your wing swept back failing.
Yeah, again, it's just one of those things, like you said, good training, and you just believe in yourself. Yeah, I'm going to get this airplane on the ground. It's gonna happen. And
I
you
think
do.
also too, at least what I think is like, there's no plan B at that point, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
literally love the one you're with. Like you got no other option. Just be a champion there, or
Yeah, what are your options? You're gonna land at airspeed, at a high, land the airplane at a great rate of airspeed, but just as I tell everybody anywhere, just think smooth. If you fly smooth and you think smooth, probably gonna be okay.
Yeah.
So don't do anything stupid.
buff out. And in the end, if you got to give back to the taxpayers, you got to give back to the taxpayers.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. As we wrap up here, most memorable sortie. It can be from your time in the Red Eagles or from just Air Force flying days in general. Looking back on a long and storied career for you.
Oh, geez, yeah, there are a bunch of them. Probably the most memorable, and it's probably the one that I do mention in the book, and it wasn't as a Red Eagle, it was actually as an aggressor, was when I almost got hit by a Phantom. And that was within about 50 feet of me, and thank God that I'm able to be here talking to you, because without the sun being at just the right position, I never would have had the shadow that came over my cockpit that allowed me to look up and see the belly of a Phantom that was closing in on me. They had lost sight, and it was, I went to like -3 Gs and, flamed out one engine. But yeah, no kidding. When I look up and when you can count rivets and see the aux air doors, everything else on a Phantom, and he's closing inside your turn circle, has lost sight of you as I'm trying to gun his lead out in front. That was most memorable. It's like, because I really thought I was dead. It's one of those, temporal distortion things when everything slows down. And I remember looking up and I'm seeing, and the initial thought went, I'm dead, But instinctively, as soon as I saw the shadow, I go, man, wait a minute, I'm out over the South China Sea, clear in a million. There's not a tree up here. Why is there a shadow over my cockpit? Right there, I started pushing forward. I go, oh no. And I pushed it as far forward as I could, thinking that there's no way he's not going to hit me. And it turned out I went through his lead's jet wash. It was a big bump, and it just violently threw me to the right. And I fully thought, oh, he's hit the tail. Well, that was just me going through the jet wash at like -3 Gs. It flamed out the right engine. It never did. It was never able to start it again. So luckily I had 2 engines, made it on back. But yeah, that was the most memorable because it was that close. I thought, yeah, this is the day I'm going to die. But had we hit, it would have been neat, back in the day. Of course, we didn't have it, but it would have been something to have telemetry, like ACM iPods, to see how close we were.
Yeah.
And I often think, what were the pilot and Wizzo in the lead airplane looking back over their shoulder, thinking as they see this F4 just go right past this F5, and they didn't hit. But it probably happened so fast they didn't have any time to call knock it off. But anyway, that was it.
He was probably just like, I need to call No Joy, but I'm going to see if I can see him just one second.
Continue. So that was the time when my essay, I thought I had my essay. Yeah, he'll be in, I got another 10, 15 seconds. Yeah, I miscalculated. He was a lot closer than that, and whatever. Anyway, that's it.
Well, you'll appreciate this. Down in Florida last week, spring break, multiple days F5s flying back into the traffic pattern, so they're still out there doing some aggressive work,
That's cool.
It's kind of, and then the F-117, I haven't seen it in person, right? You see it all over the internet nowadays, doing a lot of aggressor work. So
really, okay, that's cool for them, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. So, Z-Man, thanks for joining me. If anyone hasn't checked out, I'll link it down below, but they can get American MiG Pilot. I highly recommend. Again, I think you do a very good job, not just to make you feel good about yourself, of making you feel like you're there in the cockpit, which is pretty cool. So everyone has to go check that out. But again, thanks for taking the time today.
Hey, welcome, Rain. Thanks for having me aboard.
15,000 and some of that.
Whatever, 130.